Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard. Part 5. Chapter 9. Deep in the Forest. Adira lied to everyone. She knew they wouldn't believe her, when she could barely believe it herself. When asked what had happened, she claimed a bear was chasing her. They all said she was extremely lucky to still be alive, and prohibited her from going out by herself for the remainder of the day. "That must have been scary," Devon piped in, with a bowl of berries she picked from the forest. She offered them to Adira, who took one and shoved it into her mouth. The thing had scarred her memory for life. What she didn't understand was why it let her go. Devon slid a bag of ice towards Adira, who silently placed it on her bruised ankle. It wasn't anything serious, but even so the frustration of it pulsing every time she stepped on it was annoying. "Miriam isn't living next to you anymore, so I'm moving next door, if that's okay." Devon tried to cheer the quiet woman up, who only responded with a small nod. I'll move my things now. We can maybe have a sleepover later. Get our minds off of all this?" She motioned to the entire forest surrounding them. Adira knew Devon was only trying to be nice, but before she could deny the sleepover, she stopped herself. Everyone was having a hard time. Even Devon was always trying to be nice to the people there. The least she could do was give herself a moment's distraction from the chaos Whispering Winds was providing to be. "Hey, Devon!" Adira turned to stop the woman from walking back to her cabin. "I like that sleepover tonight if you want." Devon beamed, and for a moment she truly seemed happy. "Sounds good. I'll see you later then." Adira agreed, focusing back on the scene in front of her. Strange how a peaceful place could hold so much darkness. She wondered if the people around there knew it also, or at least sensed it. Chills ran down Adira's back as she felt an uncomfortable sensation, like she was being watched. She carefully glanced around her, and at the other people eating their dinner. No eyes were on her. Perhaps it was just her nerves. Without another thought, she got up from her seat and picked up her ice packet before heading back to her room. Maybe tonight things would calm down, and whatever was out there would never cross paths with her again. She could only hope she was that lucky. Adira hadn't had a sleepover in ages. Devon didn't seem to mind, bringing snacks and a little laptop she had brought with her to camp. "I've been here for a couple weeks now. Heard about it from someone and went to look for it on my own. The only thing that isn't so great is the Wi-Fi. It sort of fades every now and then, but I have some movies saved on my laptop." Devon laid out her purple sleeping bag, pulling up her light blonde hair into a bun. If people were to see her and Adira together, they would have thought they were sisters. Both were young, had similar hair color, and a somewhat identical nose. "I'm guessing not a lot of women here like sleepovers?" Adira asked, noticing the excitement in Devon. It was a welcome difference from her previous sad-looking face. "Well," Devon sighed, smoothing the ends of her blanket. "I always try and help people cheer up. Everyone is so gloomy. It's a little scary thinking what they'll do to themselves, what they have done." "What do you mean?" Adira asked, noticing the hesitation in Devon. "Come on, you can tell me." It's just not appropriate." "You can tell me. I mean, we have to make sure everyone is okay, right?" Devon nodded slowly, and her once tired complexion began to reappear. "People not only disappear here, they come to die. Miriam, when we found that body, I saw the resolution in her eyes. Adira's eyes widened, and she squeezed her pajama bottoms. You don't mean... I'm in charge of leading people out of here when they want to leave. I know the way back out by heart. She was behind me one moment, and the next she wasn't. It's not the first time. One man shot himself in front of me. Others show up later eaten by... Devon stopped, covering her mouth like she was going to throw up. Adira grabbed her companion's shoulder and squeezed it. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But Devon, look at me. She had to tell someone. They had to know the danger in the forest. We have to find Miriam. She breathed in deeply. There's something out there that isn't what you think it is. It's not human. It's not an animal. I don't even want to describe how it looks. But trust me when I tell you, nobody can be alone in this forest. We have to find her before it's too late. If they could save one life from that thing. Devon snatched Adira's arm, looking intensely into her companion's eyes. We can't do that. There's a reason we don't go out at night, like Jane says. We don't know what's out there. But I do, and I'm not going to let someone else go missing because of it. I don't know what you saw, but I respect Miriam's wishes to do what she does. It's horrible, but we did everything we could for her. You can't stop someone who wants to die. If something gets to her first, it's what she wanted. Adira yanked her arm away, shaking her head in disbelief. Nobody wants to be brutally ripped to pieces. Her thoughts went back to Conrad, and she wondered if the creature who had attacked her killed him. I'm going out there, with or without you. Tell me where you last saw her. Devon looked away, ashamed by what she had said. She knew there was no changing the mind of the other. With a slight nod, she gave in. All right, let's go. Chapter 10. Into the Devil's Grip. Devon held Adira's hand as the two women nearly slipped into a small stream they had jumped over. Adira couldn't tell where they were or if anything seemed familiar to her. Granted, it was late at night, and the flashlights Devon had flickered off every now and then. There, Devon pointed to a random spot in front of them. I heard her behind me the whole time. I turned and she was gone. She could have strayed away at any point. Adira looked behind them, shivering as the wind whispered through the leaves. If she's going to do something to herself, she'll go deeper. We have to backtrack and search for anything, any clues. Devon shook her head, looking around frantically. We saw nothing on the way up here. It's not safe. We don't even have anything to protect us with. Adira was close to refusing, but she realized that Devon was right. They had no form of protection, and it was suicide to just be wandering like that in the darkness. Besides, she had someone else who needed her. Mitch was still missing. As cruel and as evil as it may have seemed, she understood why Devon had refused to help. At this point, there was nothing they could do. I'm sorry I brought you out like this, Devon. We should go back and do what we were going to do. Adira felt guilty, but she knew it was stupid to be out there now. If anything, authorities had to deal with it. It's starting to rain, Devon protested, wiping the fresh drops of rain off of her cheeks. What? It's not? Adira shined her dying flashlight at Devon's face, freezing when she noticed a red, pigmented smear across the other's face. What is it? Devon asked fearfully, wiping yet another more larger drop of red from her eyebrow. Adira motioned her to be quiet, as she slowly lifted up the flashlight. Her shaky hands could barely keep still when she noticed a pair of feet dangling directly over them. A woman, Miriam herself, was half-eaten, in the clutches of a beast that was now disturbed from its dinner. The monster that had attacked Adira earlier on looked down upon her, his eyes burning so bright she felt she would faint on the spot. He flung his meal aside and dropped to the floor. Devon watched with horror as the creature grew taller, his broad shoulders and fierce posture sending the most awful feeling into her whole body. She opened her mouth and let out a shriek. Adira grabbed Devon, and the two of them went flying back down to their camp. They couldn't stop screaming, especially when one of them turned around and noticed how fast and unnatural the monster was moving. "Somebody help!" Adira yelled, hoping her voice would travel and wake up the distant campers. Devon joined as well, which only made their pursuer even angrier. He roared as he jumped directly over them and landed in front of the two. Adira crashed right into the beast's hard chest, immediately letting go of Devon so she wouldn't fall into the trap as well. "No!" Devon shouted, unable to do anything as the attacker firmly gripped onto Adira and refused to let her go. Adira knew it was over. She rotated her head to Devon with tears in her eyes and whispered a faint, "Run!" The captured woman closed her eyes and accepted her fate. Only death didn't come quickly. Her captor bolted away from Devon, leaving behind the screeching woman. Adira tried as much as she could to wiggle free from the monster's grip, but he was too strong for her. She figured he was going to string her up in a tree and eat her like he ate that woman. She could feel the victim's blood rubbing off on her face from his jacket, and the sensation made her whimper. The beast looked down at her rather quickly and stopped running. He let her go, holding his prey a little roughly by her arms as she squirmed in silent fear. Adira was afraid the slightest noise would cause him to strike quicker, and therefore kept quiet. "Please," Adira mustered up the courage to whisper, when the silence and anxiety was too much to handle. "Please, whatever you are, if you understand me, I don't want you to hurt me. Please let me go, I beg of you." The monster cocked his head, as if seemingly trying to understand what the hell she was saying. It was only when his grip loosened did Adira realize she may have a chance of escaping. She continued to whisper, hoping that somehow the sound was taming the beast. "I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, but I don't want to hurt you, and I hope you don't want to hurt me." She slowly began to pull back, repeating herself as calmly as she could. "I'm only here to find someone. I'm just here for someone. Please don't hurt me, or any of my companions. We are just here for our loved ones." "Loved ones." Adira jumped, looking around frantically, when the whispering trees repeated her words. She could hear the faint talking, forming actual sentences that were unfortunately undistinguishable at that point. Was it all in her head? She let out a yelp when the beast pulled her in closer, deeply inhaling the scent of her hair. That was it. Her brain was going to be eaten first. Adira choked out a cry, only to be grabbed by her wrist and forcefully dragged across the forest floor. She kicked and howled, but her killer didn't care. He angrily grunted every now and then, as if telling her to shut up, but never did anything to actually hurt her. It was only when they were at the entrance of some large cave did Adira finally stop. She noticed traces of bones around her, mixed with ripped clothes and stained leaves. Gasping, Adira started to yell at her captor, as he began to drag her into the dark den. "No! No!" Her cries were futile, as she dug her nails into the ground, ripping the tips of her fingers, as she disappeared into the darkness. Chapter 11. Hunting. Adira sat at the far corner of the cave, holding her legs against her chest, as drops of sweat slid down her face. She stared at the darkness for hours, knowing that somewhere in front of her the thing was watching her intently. Every now and then she could make out the faint flicker of his eyes, but the monster remained silent. Perhaps he was saving her for a morning snack, Adira thought. She eventually became too drained to handle the horror she had been thrown into, and against her better judgment, Adira started to doze off. She would snap awake every now and then, heart racing when reality came back, but at one point she completely gave up. Adira slumped to one side, looking dead by the sudden drop of her body. The monster in front of her noticed this, and it crept forward for a better look. He examined the woman closely, able to see every detail even in the dark. Her cheeks were stained and eyes puffy. Snot dripped from her nose due to crying. But she was finally quiet, at least for the night. He nudged her, but she didn't stir. The monster turned away from the woman and clawed his way out of the cave. His horned head sniffed the air, grunting as a familiar scent radiated around him. It was human and traveling from somewhere close by. He closed his eyes, concentrating as vision of trees and the dark morning sky played before him. The scene was coming from Adira, not so far from his current location. He could sense it was closest to where the human was, and therefore had chosen it to be his helper. The beast had the ability to see through creatures' eyes. In fact, he could see through the eyes of every living animal in the forest. It was how he knew who needed to be punished. The visions suddenly stopped, as a loud bang erupted through the silent morning. The monster knew what had happened, and began to bolt towards his designated target. He could smell freshly spilled blood, and it made him growl with anger as he latched on to a tree branch, examining the scenery below him once he had reached the spot. A hunter, clad in camo and harnessing a shotgun, bent over a freshly shot deer. The light of his flashlight reflected over the bloodied chest of the animal, and he placed it in his teeth as he reached into his pocket for a buck knife. The monster narrowed his eyes, slowly creeping down the tree trunk and upon his unsuspecting victim. The man didn't even notice how close the creature was until it was too late. One quick swipe of his claw clutched the man's head, pulling him up as he muffled his outburst of surprise. Red eyes bored deep into brown ones, digesting every bit of emotion that flooded into them. The creature savored killing humans who disrupted his forest, and the more he consumed their flesh, the more powerful he felt. The trembling fist before his eyes made his mouth water and his jaw cracked wide open. The man's muffled screams would fall on deaf ears as the gaping hole of darkness revealed a large mouth filled with sharp teeth. He chomped down on the man's body, ripping into him as he convulsed in his grip. It was only when the body stopped twitching did the creature let go. He hopped down on the floor and laid eyes on the deer, barely holding on to life as it struggled to breathe. The monster gently lifted the dying doe's head with bloody claws, showing the animal what had become of her killer. The doe stared at the mangled body of the hunter and breathed out a sigh of relief. Her eyes went blank as her chest stopped heaving, finding peace at last. Her savior stayed by her side until the sun started to rise. It was only then that he picked up the body in his arms, cradling it as he searched for a proper place to bury the animal. Adira slowly came to her senses, rubbing her burning eyes as she tried to make sense of where she was. Little by little, flashes of what had happened started to come back. She immediately got up, eyes focusing on the entrance of the cave, which was now filled with the light from the morning sun. The creature who had taken her was nowhere to be found, and she was still alive. Carefully, Adira began to walk towards her salvation. She would have bolted had she not realized the beast directly outside, back facing her and hunched over what appeared to be a rock monument. He seemed to have finished putting it together, placing a stick figure of something that looked like himself on top of it. It was only then that Adira realized it was exactly like the rock structure she had seen before. Was it some type of ritual? Her suspicions were further confirmed when he picked up a dripping pile of what must have been flesh. The creature squeezed it over the monument like it was a wet rock. A stream of blood flowed through his claws as he drizzled it down the rocks. It flowed onto the ground, identical to a fountain, and made Adira shiver at the gruesome sight. She turned away, resting on a tree as a wave of nausea overflowed her. Before she came back to her senses, the monster, who was already aware of her presence, turned back. His eyes narrowed as he looked her over, a young woman now pale and hunched over in disgust. By the time Adira lifted her gaze, he was directly in front of her. She jumped, breathing heavily at the enormity of the being. He must have been about 8 to 9 feet tall, and despite having human qualities, it was very difficult to place him as one. Adira was quiet as he looked down upon her silently, blood dripping from the claws that hung by his side. She slowly managed to get up, hesitating to speak once she was sure he wouldn't hurt her. "Hello?" Her voice squeaked out, wondering if the giant even spoke. Who are you? Why are you keeping me here?" He didn't even respond. Instead crossed his arms over his chest and tapped his boot on the ground, like he was impatient. Adira was caught off guard by how human the monster was acting. But how could she be willing to speak to something that had scarred her memory so horribly? From chasing her down to eating that woman. She steadied herself as another wave of nausea hit, but this time she couldn't hold it in. With disgust, she spewed out phlegm all over the creature's boots by accident. He stopped tapping his foot as he looked down at the mess that had become of his shoes. Adira didn't even realize what she had done until a second later. She wiped her dripping mouth and raised her hands, stepping back as the being growled in anger. Thank you for listening to part 5 of A Hunting Season by Dr. Rockhard.